welcome to Compass Media. It's Sunday, the 5th of March 2023, and news is breaking on mainstream media that €1.1 million was diverted from Minister Roderic O'Gorman department to various projects. I'm joined now by Luke Peter Silk, the personal assistant to Aontú leader Peadar Tóibín, and Luke has been an activist for a number of years on issues relating to travellers' rights and also to mother and baby home survivors. Luke, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Anna. Yeah, it is a shocking story, I suppose, that we see in the Sunday Independent today. And I have to say a very good job to Mark Tighe on his presentation of the story, but also to say thank you very much to the whistleblower who would have reached out to me with the documents and copies of the emails. I suppose I was very frustrated maybe about 2 weeks ago when the Mother and Baby Homes Redress Scheme was passing through the Dáil by way of legislation. I thought the scheme was deeply flawed. Basically, anyone who had spent less than 6 months in a mother and baby home was excluded from the scheme, and the law now stands that they won't get redress. And a lot of us in opposition couldn't quite understand that. And indeed, I had written a number of amendments, about, I think, 12 amendments, and the government opposed every single one of them when Peadar Tóibín introduced them in the Dáil. So I think what we see today then kind of shows a little bit of insight into the mindset within the department, where they obviously announced this fund for LGBT groups. And they were, those groups, certainly a lot of them, I would argue, were entitled to funding, and there was a scheme set up, and that was all good. But what happened was too many groups applied and the department didn't have the money for them. So what they basically did then was they raided €250,000 from the Migrant Integration Fund. They took €350,000 from the Magdalene scheme, and they took €150,000 from the Gender Equality Scheme. And then the following year, 2022, they took €354,000 from the Traveller Fund. I think it's just unforgivable, really. And what it shows is that they worked night and day to try and get this funding across the line for these groups. And when they had that sorted out on, I believe it was the 16th of November, 2021, then they announced the following day the deeply flawed mother and baby home redress package that has been critiqued over the past number of weeks. When you speak to the survivors of mother and baby homes and you see what they went through, and even if they left the home before 6 months, oftentimes they endured abuse when they were what was called farmed out to local families, and they endured abuse, horrific abuse, in those situations, in those households, even though they left before they were 6 months old. And they're excluded from this package. And it's just very disappointing to see that the department did not move heaven and earth to accommodate the survivors of mother and baby homes, and that they dipped into that package kind of secretly. They were kind of humming and hawing about whether or not it was necessary to inform the Minister of Public Expenditure that they were raiding the money from that pot. When you look at travellers and the issue with traveller accommodation across the country, and you look at the shocking situation in terms of mental health in the travelling community, the life expectancy rates when compared with settled people, it's just terrible. And to think that there was €354,000 taken out of that fund, I think it's unforgivable. And then, as well as that, I must mention the refugees. We're all familiar with stories in recent times where refugees have, in some cases, found themselves homeless after coming to our country, or found themselves living in tents. And to think that €250,000 was taken out of the Migrant Integration Fund or the Irish Refugee Protection Programme. It's just shocking, and I don't think enough of a deal is being made about it. Of course, we have the Sunday Independent today, but I think it is a story worthy of coverage elsewhere.
Well, of course, one of the groups where that money was diverted to is Tenny, and some €93,000 odd was given to TENI, which is the advocacy group for transgender people. And of course, Mark Tighe has already exposed the goings on in TENI in the Sunday Times in a report in March 2021 and in May 2022, I believe. And basically, this amounted to the fact that the then CEO had cast herself as a chartered accountant. And when this was found not to be the case, she resigned her position from TENI and she was replaced. And also, of course, TENI, as recently as last November, in response to news throughout last year that they had failed over a number of years to submit their accounts, as is the law under the legislation governing charities. They issued this statement saying that they would rectify this matter and that they would improve matters going forward in 2023. So here we have the minister diverting money to an NGO that had a proven track record in poor governance and in poor accounting practices. So I suppose, look, you have trawled through these tranche of emails. Tell me just a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not 100% familiar with the TENI side of things. I think it's the Transgender Equality Network Ireland, they're called, but it certainly does appear that they have been in trouble with the charities regulator, and that on foot of that, I understand the HSE stopped funding them. So one would question what the relevance of that fact is to the minister's funding of them in 2021. Yeah, I have trawled through the documents, again, 102 pages of them. So I stayed up all night one night to read through them and filter through them. And I thought some of the language in them was quite interesting. So the officials within the department, as I've alluded to already, they were kind of between two minds on whether it was necessary to inform the Department of Public Expenditure about this. And when they did inform them, it was in very vague language. So it was, you know, we took X amount of funding under subhead D07 and so on. They didn't explicitly say the name of the fund or the purpose of the fund that they were withdrawing money from. More of the language then that I found upsetting was the effort that they went to, the lengths that they went to. I'll work through lunch. I'll work late tonight if necessary to get this over the line. That was one quote from one of the emails. And when you see how mother and baby home survivors were neglected in the scheme that was announced the same week, you just feel incredibly disappointed that the same attitude did not exist towards that vulnerable group. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that LGBT groups should not get funding. I certainly know many groups who do great work, anti-bullying work in schools and things like that. What I am saying is that we shouldn't have budget underspends when it comes to the travelling community, given the situation that they're in. Given the refugee crisis we're currently experiencing, we should not be diverting funding out of that pot. Given the horrific abuse, systematic abuse that was endured by so many women and children in mother and baby home institutions and in Magdalene laundries over the years, we should not be raiding money from them. Funding of the LGBT groups should not come at the expense of other vulnerable groups within our society. So that's kind of it. And it's not until you read the emails and the documents that you see the lengths they went to satisfy this funding target that they had set for themselves. I would ask as well, why was there underspends in those other departments? You know, when you have a situation where refugees are homeless, where you have a situation where the government, as we see this week, are failing to pay the hotels that are accommodating refugees and asylum seekers. In the context of that, how you could take hundreds of thousands from that fund in the middle of that crisis, the mind really boggles. But there was something suspicious about it. You know, the Magdalene scheme is separate to the mother and baby home scheme. But the key point to this is that this LGBT funding, the funding for those groups, when they had sorted all that out and moved funding across budget lines, that's the way they phrased it in the emails. Once they had that sorted and came to the agreement of what percentage they were going to fund the groups to and who was going to get how much, they announced all that. And then the following day, they announced the other scheme for the mother and baby home survivors, which has been widely criticized across the board for the various flaws with it. So one wonders, of course, there surely is a relationship between both press releases, one day after another, that they had moved all this funding across budget lines, they had set in stone the amounts that the LGBT groups were getting, and then the following day they announced a watered down, utterly disrespectful, exclusionary redress scheme for mother and baby home survivors. So I do think it is a complex story, but again, I do think the Sunday Independent has done a very good job at laying the facts out chronologically. The other thing I'll just say on it as well, Anna, is lest there be any question about it, the email correspondence that I have seen shows that the minister signed off on this transfer of funds. That is there in black and white. The minister has signed off.
But just to pick up on that point, do you think this is a resigning matter for the minister?
Well, I would certainly be open to, before I'd call for anyone's head, I'd be open to hearing their perspective. I do think he needs to commit to a questions and answers session within the Dáil on this topic. And I do think then it will get more complicated. If it is the case that they were deliberately taking money or underspending in some areas so that they could divert funding to these groups that had applied, and if the application by these groups had in any way influenced the design and creation and wording of the legislation around the mother and baby home redress scheme, then I think we're going to have to go back to the redress scheme and relook at it and reword it in such a way so that people aren't excluded. And if we have to do that, and if the minister concedes that he was, and again, I'm only speculating, that he might have been withholding money from that scheme or trying to spend very frugally in terms of redress for mother and baby home survivors so as to enable himself to spend in other areas. If he did that, I think we're going to see a lot of uproar and a lot of comparison with some of the statements that he made in the Dáil in recent weeks, where he was as good as suggesting we don't have money to give you. If those statements can be proven untrue, then I think the minister is going to find himself in a very difficult position indeed.
Luke Peter Silk, personal assistant to Aontaithe Leader Peadar Turbine, I want to thank you most sincerely for joining us today. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for the incredible work that you are doing for mothers and their children. It's all behind the scenes. You rarely, if ever, get credit for it, but we mothers are deeply, deeply appreciative of it.
Thanks very much, Anna, and thanks very much for having me on your programme today and for giving this story the coverage and airtime and discussion that I believe it warrants. Thank you very much.
To those of you who have been watching, I want to thank you sincerely. You have a role to play in getting this story out by sharing this video. And it is only with huge pressure from the public that there will be any advances in holding the minister to account. Thank you for watching.